Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
Many of you probably know that we're always interested in getting your suggestions for podcast topics. If you'd like to submit a topic, you can go to our website, and under the menu item podcasts, there's drop-down menu. One of those is submit a topic. So today's episode is one that we took from one of your suggestions. We're going to be talking about people-pleasing. I thought this was just a really terrific topic. So people-pleasing is a pattern of compulsively over-accommodating, attending to other people's needs, not attending to your own needs, looking for acceptance, approval, to avoid conflict. And a little bit of it may be a good thing, but too much of it certainly gets in our way and prevents us from engaging our own individuation process. So we're going to be, as we like to do, circumambulating that topic today.
I think that key word there is feeling compulsed, feeling that there are some psychological factors inside of us that are driving us to be people-pleasing, that may be fear-driven or trauma-driven, or have some other elements inside of us that are not necessarily aligned with our natural way of being, and therefore become something worth being curious about.
What I think about often is what is the feeling when somebody comes over, or you have an obligation, or whatever it might be. What is the feeling that you're having? Is it the feeling of, oh my gosh, I just have to do this, or it's on my list, or I need to run to the store, I need to manage? Check your stress level and check that sense of obligation and duty and service and what you think you have to provide, or be especially sure to be on time, or whatever that might be. Where's that coming from in you? Is it coming from a place of, oh my gosh, I can't wait to, I'm going to make something, I'm going to cook something, I'm going to have fresh cookies available, this is great? Or is it coming from, I got to get ready, I need to straighten out the house, I better dash to the store, make sure everybody has something to eat and something to drink. Just little litmus tests about what's going on inside, because it's a clue to whether you're orienting to the people and pleasing them, duty, obligation, should, must do it, versus a feeling of expansiveness or creativity, or that this is going to be really fun.
Yeah, there's a values-driven kindness we also can find in ourselves that's coming from the soul. And then there's these other intrusive demands, whether they're coming from the outside or inside, that are something else.
I'm thinking about all the different variations, and there is that more just kind of almost characterologic tendency to people please. It may, for some of us, it may just be the way we've always been. We may do it very unquestioningly and unthinkingly. We may not even know another way. And it can be, and I think this is to your point, Deb, it can really be depleting to do that rather than kind of giving us energy. So it could be that if we've always been a people pleaser, at some point we sort of hit a wall and we realize it's really not paying off. But, let's talk about this idea of agreeableness, because, and Joseph, I know you know more about this than I do. Scientists have sort of cataloged major characterological traits, and one of they've come up with the big five. And one of them is agreeableness. Now, agreeableness is not exactly the same thing as people-pleasing, but I think there's maybe there's some overlap there. Are there neighbors or something? So tell us about that.
In the evolution of that Big Five personality test, and they were researching common traits and deciding which traits they would monitor and which traits they would set aside. As they were establishing this, they noticed this cofactor of agreeable versus disagreeable just seemed to show up spontaneously as they were doing their calculations, and it happened so frequently that they stumbled into this realization that this is a trait that really defines and influences a number of other aspects of personality. So a couple of ways that these particular researchers were looking at agreeability. They were saying that there's an aspect of trust in it, straightforwardness, altruism, compliance, modesty, and tender-mindedness. And this could be broken down into two different categories. One is just compassion, that people who are particularly agreeable may notice that they are deeply influenced by the suffering of others. And that makes them want to address it and also carefully not add to the distress or suffering of another person. That can make them adopt a very agreeable stance. Another element, which I think is more complicated, is politeness. When somebody feels that they must be agreeable because that's the rule, that's the norm. The rule is to not come across as aggressive. The rule is to always appear fair. And these two ways of looking at it mix together to create a particular intensity of trait. I think that as a characteristic of personality, it's neither good nor bad. It's an observational thing. We see it in ourselves, we see it in other people. It's more or less dominant, but it seems to have a big effect on the individual.
In my book, The Vital Spark, I have a whole chapter on agreeableness. And, one of the things about agreeableness is that in that Big Five personality test, which is, there's a lot of data there. And I think it's my understanding is that it's pretty robust. And one of the really consistent findings is that in general and across cultures, women score higher in agreeableness than men do. And we could have this argument about whether that's nature or nurture, but there it is across cultures, like not just here, but in all kinds of different environments. In general, on a population level, women tend to be more agreeable than men. And this, as you said, Joseph, it's kind of neutral. There's some great things that go along with being agreeable, and maybe there's some not so great things. But it is interesting that it tracks more with women.
What I'm thinking about is agreeableness. I mean, that's the price of growing up, being in a family, being enculturated. We all have to develop a persona. We all have to develop a social veneer that serves us. It's like the cornea of the eye. It keeps out the dirt and the grit and the specks, and it allows us to see out safely, gives us a safe place to be when we're interacting with, classmates, workmates, heaven forfend, family. It's a good thing that we develop it. And we learn these things, to be polite. You raise your hand in class. So to some extent, we have to learn to be somewhat agreeable in order to be socialized in a way that's rewarding and satisfying to us. So agreeableness is one thing, and people-pleasing is, I think, when we sacrifice something that is authentically ourselves in order to put the other person first or please or flatter or some other thing, that there's something different, whether it's just a little tinge of something or it's way over the top. We're giving something away of ourselves, our authentic selves. Is it judicious? Is it in the service of getting something done in the moment? Or is it a characterological trait where I always do that. Whatever my boss wants, I always do that. I always stay late. I always work on the weekend. And that takes agreeableness into a slightly different territory.
Well, it's almost like if you tend to be agreeable, you might have to learn how to sometimes be disagreeable, right? I tell this story in the Vital Spark about when I was in my 20s and I had this older friend. She was she was probably in her 50s at that point, and she was a really great cook, and she had this great apartment, and she used to invite a bunch of us over, and she would make these great dinners, and we'd be sitting out on her roof deck eating, and it's like great food and it's a great dessert. And the first time I went over, we'd finished dessert, we're up on the roof deck, the stars are out. I'm having a glass of wine, and she comes up, her name was Terry, she comes up and she says with a smile on her face, she goes, "Okay, I'm going to bed, so it's time for you to leave."
Oh,
And I was like, "What?" I couldn't believe it. Like, she just kicked us out. But I was so flabbergasted. But then sort of after I got over my shock, I was like, that is so cool. That you could just, she wasn't really, to your point, Deb, like she wanted to offer us this wonderful evening and she wanted to cook for us. It was so generous, but then she wanted us the fuck out of there so she could go to bed, which I now so relate to. So I loved her just being able to be not feeling like she had to sort of think about us all the time.
I think that's a great little litmus test of here's this person that has the energy, the generosity, the expansiveness of spirit to invite you over, and it was energizing. For her to have company and we'll do this and here's this and have some bounty. And then when it became depleting, she was able to say, sorry, now my energy's going down. I got to go to bed. Goodbye. Of when is it energizing and when does it start to become burdensome and depleting?
And so, in terms coming back to some of the information around the big five, is that agreeability generally cultivates higher levels of trust, collaborative problem solving, less counterproductive behavior, stronger team cohesion, more pro-social acts. They're also in other environments that say very high conflict jobs, or you're in a very zero-sum kind of environment. Very high agreeableness can depress the individual gains, and lower agreeableness can aid in really tough negotiations and the enforcement of norms. So it's context dependent as to whether or not the agreeable or the disagreeable energy, if we think about it that way, is the right approach. But overall, I think what we're saying is, are we conscious of it? I mean, if somebody is agreeable without even thinking about it, and then at the end of the day, they're asking themselves, why did I agree to this? I said I'm going to do these 4 things, and I'm going to drive everybody, and I'm going to cook this. How did I get to all of these yes statements regarding all of these things? And that can be a habitual, agreeable attitude, which can be costly if we're choosing thoughtfully to align with someone or something. That can actually be a very positive experience. And as you were saying, Lisa, to be able to take hold of that energy inside of ourselves and to put out what's true. I'm not going to agree to this, but I can agree to that. And that allows everyone to be visible in this space.
Yeah, I mean, you make it sound easy, but it isn't always easy if you tend to be a kind of agreeable person who's a little conflict avoidant. Doing that can be very, very frightening, but I agree with you. It's something to work toward. One of the things I think about, and I think I'm just amplifying what you were just saying, Joseph, is what's your point of reference when you're making a decision about what you're going to do or how you're going to answer someone? Are you just focused on that other person, or are you checking in with yourself and finding out about how you feel? And this is where I think we can think about this in terms of individuation. Because if you are taking the time to check in with yourself, and it goes to the consciousness part, where is your compass about how you want to spend your time, what your values are, what matters to you? Are you taking that into account? Or are you only referencing what the other person wants? I mean, of course, in the short term, it can be a real pleasure to meet another person's needs. It can further a goal. Like you said, there's all these potential benefits, better relationships. But over a lifetime, if you never step back, take stock, what is it I want? What feels right for me? Does this reflect my true feeling on the subject? Is this in line with my values and beliefs? Am I compromising myself in acceding to this or in meeting this other person's needs? Then we're really not following our own path. And and Jung kind of talks about this in a sort of indirect way in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, his autobiography. He basically says at the end, I was not very agreeable. I did whatever I wanted to do. I was pulled along, and I know I hurt people, but I had to do my own thing. I simply had to do it. And the truth is that if you're not going to be agreeable all the time, if you're not going to be a people pleaser, you're going to piss some people off. You're going to hurt people. You're going to inconvenience people. And that's just something that you're going to have to take on board. And for some of us, that's hard.
Yeah, I think that's such a really good point. I liked your reference. I'm going to go back and reiterate it. Of what is your point of reference? Is it what I need, how I feel, what my values are? Am I here in my interior? Or is my point of reference the exterior of what my family members want and expect and need? Or my boss or anyone, whoever it is, that I just automatically kind of fall over. I think of it as leaning forward so far you sort of fall in to the other person's field and automatically agree. Where's your point of reference? And it can be both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. What this other person wants and needs does matter. I hear it. I'm listening. I'm taking it in and considering it. And then what I want, what I have to give today, or should I work this weekend? All those things. Can you step back and really kind of think about it? But I also want to kind of take our conversation into the realm of what can happen in a family where maybe things aren't so great, that there's a kind of relational dynamic and even relational trauma that can spark a kind of people-pleasing that is deeper, maybe tinged more with need and a kind of automaticity, etc. And in that context, I just read a wonderful book that's coming out in March called The Littlest Princess, or The Princess Who Found Her Name by Dale Kushner. So keep an eye out for that. It will be published by Chiron. And this is a woman, Dale Kushner, who wrote a fairy tale about a princess who became Princess Please Her because her mother, the queen, wanted another child in order to preserve her own feeling of vitality and youth and being, a wonderful, needed young mother. The littlest princess's older sister was very jealous because mom paid more attention to the new baby and the little girl than the older girl. And then she says the littlest princess grew more and more confused. It was unthinkable that her older sister did not love her, so she didn't let herself think it. Instead, another thought popped into her head. My sister is displeased with me. I must be displeasing. I must try harder to please her. I don't think this dynamic is unfamiliar to people. And to some extent, there's a reality base in it that we have to earn someone's love. We have to be pleasing. We have to do what they want. And I think we all learn that very young, like, use your knife and fork. Don't eat with your hands. Or there will be interpersonal consequences from some parent at the table telling you to do that. Versus that place where it becomes self-blame, it becomes habitual, it becomes a retroflective thing that you just swallow and gulp down what you feel, what you need, what you want, because the price of not doing that is rejection or abandonment of some kind from the other. That other that we all need early on, and we're social animals. So I think I'd like to talk a little bit about that, of the desperation and how it gets kind of bred in the bone. If that was the price that you had to pay for relationships in your family of origin.
So when I'm listening to that, Deb, I'm thinking about the kind of family dynamics that cultivate a dependent narcissism. That narcissism, I think, is widely misunderstood by the TikTok pundits of the world. But narcissism is a problem with the way people perceive themselves. Their image of themselves becomes disconnected to the deep, deep layers of their soul. And the image of the self becomes overly influenced by whether or not we are pleasing to our parents. And if we're raised in a home where being pleasurable to the parent is the dominant demand, then the child loses contact with their own interiority, their own instincts, their own needs, and everything is in orbit to the look or the voice of the parent that is making these demands. And so the child is trained to feel that they're only okay when they are reflecting what the parent needs, demands, wants, approves of. And that sets up a context that later in life, I don't know who I am, I don't know what I want, but I know how to stare at another person and just nod in order to have a sense of value in myself. All genders are vulnerable to that. That's a rather extreme circumstance, but it's substantial. And underneath it, to be honest, is a covert contract that I will provide whatever it is that pleases you, and that you will then like me, love me, keep me safe. And more perniciously, you will anticipate my needs without my having to say it and meet those needs. Of course, it never really works out. So the person who has a dependent narcissistic nature is often harboring a vat of anger and rage and resentment because the unconscious contract never gets executed. I'm doing everything that I think will please you, but I don't seem to be getting much back, and I don't feel like I'm being taken care of or my needs anticipated. And that creates a kind of war that erupts and leads to passive-aggressive behavior.
There's a lot that you both just put out there, so I think I'm trying to synthesize it. I think, both of those dynamics are very big dynamics. And just to kind of go back to Deb for just a second, you're really sort of talking about a kind of trauma-based people pleasing that can look like fawning, or at least that's what I hear in what you said, that one of the trauma responses is fawning. I'm going to bend over backwards, make myself totally vulnerable to you, and do whatever you want. And we can use that as a habitual style of relating when we've had sort of relational trauma in childhood, which I think is what you're describing, Deb. And it's It's heartbreaking. And it goes back to kind of where you started at the top today, Joseph, that, when we talk about the most extreme version of people pleasing, it's really, it is compulsive. It's a kind of compulsive behavior. And I think it's often associated with the dynamic that Deb just lifted up. Joseph, I feel like what you brought forward is so important. And I think so familiar to many of us that we've all probably interacted with someone who seems like he or she is all about doing whatever we want, but we feel something else in the field, and it is the influence of that. And I like how you put it, that kind of that covert contract that we're not even conscious of, and the other person's probably not even conscious of. So it can be confusing to be around someone who has what we would say this kind of dependent narcissism, because they seem very lovely, but really there is a kind of effort to control or manipulate that's implied in the interactions.
Yep. You feel it. There's a kind of coercion going on underneath. But I also think, if the relational dynamic early on has not really been in favor of a child, supporting a child's coming into a sense of him or herself, and the price of parental or other adult approval is to be like this or to be like that, to perform well or to be cute or to be quiet and sit over in the corner and not have any wants or needs. It goes in very deep because that is the price of relationship. And a child needs that so badly that they'll do almost anything to get it because they're little, adults are big. At some level, they know, they depend on connection, approval, care, safety, all the rest of it from adults. And when that is missing, it can go into people pleasing. And the historical variant on this that I have, we're talking a lot now about COVID and what happened to kids who couldn't do what kids need to do, get outside and play and do peer relationships and all that stuff. They had to conform. They had to stay in. They had to do school online. And so there's a kind of forced people-pleasing inherent in that. During World War II, when London was being blitzed and thousands of kids were evacuated, that's what happened in that children's story, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And when kids were interviewed, child after child after child who'd been sent away for their safety to live said, it's because I wasn't a good enough boy or a good enough girl. So it goes deep in us that if I am good enough, whatever that might mean in an individual context, then I will get the approval, the love, the care, the attention that I need. And sometimes the trauma, as with the Blitz of London during World War II, can't be helped. COVID could not be helped. But there is a price of having to find a way to connect that has to do with conforming, constricting, and being over-oriented to the new external world circumstances. And then we have to take stock later on and start to reflect and become aware and engage in our own development and individuation.
So one piece that we could look at is an idea that Winnicott brought forward, that when we are in an environment where our truer nature is not being reflected to us, that we develop what he called a false self. And then if this happens when we're quite young, we can come to believe that the false self is who I really am. And then we move forward through the arc of our life, constantly as we were suggesting, looking in other people's faces, listening for what they need, following other people's list of requests, with the sense that that gives me a feeling of being real, gives me a feeling that this is my purpose in life. But under the surface, people become symptomatic. And this is something that was central to Jung's ideas, that our waking personality must be in a primary relationship to the self, to the deepest center. When the self has been replaced by our parents, the school system, siblings who are making demands, or any number of other things, we become unwell.
Yeah, and I think it relates to, kind of what I was saying before about in the Jungian terms is you have to connect with the self, essentially. Where is that ego self axis? Where do you have connection with your deep center? If you're too much wrapped up in Winnicott's false self, that's a different self, by the way. All use his terms so differently. But then you don't have that orientation to your center, to your depth, and you can simply be sort of batted about by the winds, of whoever. There's an old Woody Allen movie called Zelig that's less well known. It must be from like the 80s, but it's such a charming little film because it starts with Zelig, the main character's at a party, and someone asks him if he's ever read Moby Dick, and he lies. He pretends like he has, even though he hasn't. And from there, he winds up in all of these situations where he just conforms to what anyone wants of him. And it was like the 80s, right? So this was before computer generated animation and stuff, but somehow they did this really great stuff where he's at like a Nazi rally and he's giving a Nazi salute. He just becomes he's a chameleon, and I think and the film, I literally haven't seen it since the 1980s, so I should go back and watch it. But of course the film explores the downside of not having our own sense of self and simply conforming to what others around us want us to be. So I guess maybe that chameleon metaphor is perhaps another way of thinking about this.
What I'm thinking about is how do we connect or build or find if it hasn't been supported and we haven't been encouraged and external world circumstances did not facilitate the development of who are you and what do you like and how do you feel? What are your interests? If that has not been encouraged and supported, it can be a little difficult to say to somebody, well, where's your authentic self and what do you really feel? Where are your values? What do you like? And that's the process, that can be the place to begin is, oh my gosh, I don't know. I don't know what I like. And I've had people in the consulting room who say, it doesn't matter to me. When somebody says, should we do A or B? Well, I don't care. It's either one is fine with me. Yeah, I know, but I really want to know. Would you rather go, for a walk, or would you rather go kayaking? Oh, whatever you want.
It's so annoying when people do that, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It is. And what I've come to appreciate for some people is they really, truly, honestly don't know and don't care. And it is almost unfair to say, come on, sit down and tell me which one you prefer, because it has been inculcated in them to be agreeable.
Yeah.
And I'm putting little air quotes around it because that's not true agreeability. But if you've learned to define yourself in the context of a demanding, controlling other or environment, then I think it takes a little patience on the part of other people even to build the awareness of, seriously though, I really do want to know if you'd rather go for a walk or get the kayak out. Sit, think, ponder, because that's the very thing that has not been encouraged, supported, nurtured. And then the poor person gets that backlash of, why are you such a nebbish? I asked you a simple question. Would you rather do A or B? And you're waffling around.
I mean, there is a difference between not knowing and not caring, right? It's funny. I was with a friend over the weekend. We decided to go see a movie, and we had a couple to pick from. And I really couldn't. I didn't have a strong preference, so we said, let's flip a coin. So we did. But so there is not caring, and then there's not knowing, Deb. And I think that's the heartbreaking situation that you're lifting up. Is that sometimes we don't know what it's like to be in touch with our own desires, and so we do just kind of go along with what other people want. And there can be a cost to having our own desires, because as I said before, you might make someone unhappy. You might inconvenience someone. You might piss somebody off.
And you never learned how. That the automatic go-to is what you, whoever that you happens to be, want or prefer. So I think, there's just a whole range here that we're putting under the heading of people-pleasing, from, something that's fairly subtle and may veer into the agreeability category, versus the thing that really stems from not having been supported to develop enough sense of value, self, authenticity, and an internal reference point. So the only thing that person has to ping off of is what the other person or the circumstances are demanding.
So we're leaning a little bit into some of the solutions. Depending on one's typology, one is either going to discern what is highly valuable based on feeling or thinking. And when we are trying to reestablish what our experience is, what is my task in a given moment, we can ask ourselves, what do I like? And put that in some sense of a scale. So, for instance, asking somebody what they want or what they desire can be very complicated because it sounds so big. But if I ask somebody, do you like this or not like it? Take everything else off the table. Do you like it or not like it? If you do like it, 0 to 10, how much do you like it? Or if you don't like it, 0 to 10, how much don't you like it? You don't have to make a decision up front, but can you step away and at least ponder, do I like it or not like it? Just that little bit. If you're a thinking type, it's not always quite so black and white. I think feeling types have a little bit more of a black and white quality to it. But asking somebody, what do you think about this possibility? How do you think that it will affect you? How do you think that it will affect the other person? What does that suggest to you? Those are two little ways to try to angle back into yourself and away from staring at the face of the other person to see whether there's a flicker of anger or pleasure or neutrality on them. Sometimes we have to, honestly, if you're in that situation, just say, excuse me, and go to the restroom. Just sit alone for yourself and just, without staring at the face of the other person, do I like it or not like it? Just me, all alone here in the can, talking to myself. And sometimes we need that.
I love that of you can always cut yourself a break and give yourself at least a little time to consider it and just kind of come home to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Of like, I don't know. Now we're sort of like frozen. It's like, I love that of like, oh, excuse me, just go to the restroom. In just a second.
AKA the room of inner reflection.
Yes, the rest room.
The rest room.
but it's such a powerful sentence. I talk about this with my analysans a lot. It's such a powerful sentence to be able to say something like, I'm going to have to think about that. I mean, obviously, do you want to go see this movie or that movie? Maybe you go to the restroom. But if someone calls you up and says, hey, can you blah, 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 or do you want to, it took me a while to realize that you can actually just say, I got to think about that. I'll get back to you. There are very few situations where you can't say that, actually. And oftentimes when I hang up the phone, I know right away, oh, did you just see that motion I made? Like I was hanging up one of those old-fashioned phones. When you hang up the phone.
We're that old.
I know. I definitely want to do that. Or no, I don't. Or maybe I'd like to do that, but only if something like that. So it gives you just need room. I remember when I was in a position of authority at an organization, and I was probably about 30, and I had not gotten my hands around this stuff at all. And some guys came into the office. They were a little bit older than me, and I wanted them to like me, and I wanted them to think I was doing a good job. And they asked for permission to do something that was so clearly a hell no. And they put me on the spot. They asked me, and I said yes. And I shouldn't have. And I still think about that as such an example of this. Like I just was in kind of people-pleasing mode. And I said yes, even though I knew in the moment that it was like, why were they even asking? And if I had just said, I'll get back to you tomorrow, it would have all gone down differently. So those are good tools, whether it's the bathroom for 5 minutes or just tell them you'll come tomorrow. Those are good tools to break out of that compulsive response.
And that can be very much part of it, is I have to give you an answer right this minute. So sometimes I envision it as, and I've said to people, let's think about it on a range. That somebody comes up to you and says, would you mind going to the bank? I'm really in a pickle. I'll pay you back, but would you mind just take a break during your lunch hour, go to the bank and get me $10,000?
Sure.
Most people. Oh, okay, thanks, Joseph.
Now you know.
Most people go like, oh no, I wouldn't do that. So now we take it down to the other end of the scale of like your situation, Lisa, of whatever those men wanted, that you automatically might say yes. Or, can you bring 4 dozen? Your brownies are so great. Can you bring 4 dozen to the school fundraiser? Let me think about that. I'll get back to you tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And having been in that position, my moment of liberation, always having been the one that grew all the little bean sprouts in the paper cups and all that jazz, was when I went out and bought a dozen cookies for the bake sale. Ooh, transgression. Everyone knows.
Oh, you're that kind of a person.
I didn't do homemade.
Oh, dear.
I mean, some things are so clearly it's a no, but others but I love that idea of just interrupt your instinct to give an automatic reply, automatic yes. I'll get back to you.
So as long as we're talking about remedies, there is a fairy tale that I talk about in the Vital Spark that I think is a really great example of the moment where someone who has perhaps been socialized into being agreeable or perhaps even being a bit of a people pleaser kind of gets her hands around some appropriate aggression. Because if we've been socialized in this way, we can think about it in Jungian terms that our aggressive capacity has gone into the shadow. It's something that we haven't developed. We haven't let ourselves know about it. It's kind of over there. If we see other people being aggressive, we might think, that person's totally out of control. We haven't claimed that capacity in ourselves. And of course, I'm using the word capacity because it's a really important word. Because this is not about, you have to be able to be aggressive all the time. No. Having an aggressive capacity means it's a skill. that you can choose to apply. It's not a way of moving through the world, it's an ability. So I am going to quickly read the Grimm's fairy tale, The Frog Prince. Once upon a time, a princess sat at the edge of a well playing with a beautiful golden ball, her favorite plaything. She delighted in throwing it up into the air and catching it, but she dropped it, and it fell into the water and sank. The princess was distraught. When she looked into the well, she saw it was so deep that she couldn't see the bottom. She sat down at the edge of the well and began to weep and lament. "I would give anything in the world to get my ball back," she cried. As she cried, a frog stuck its head out of the water and said, "Why are you weeping?" "Oh," responded the princess, "you can't help me, you nasty frog. My ball has fallen into the water." The frog offered to fetch the ball for her on the condition that she accept him as her companion and let him sit next to her, eat from her plate, sleep in her bed, and promise to love and cherish him. The princess thought that the frog's demands were nonsense and couldn't imagine that he would ever leave the water. So she quickly promised him what he asked in hopes that he would retrieve her ball. The frog disappeared into the water and returned a moment later with the ball in his mouth. The princess quickly took it from him, delighted to have her plaything back. Then, without pausing, she rushed off back to the castle. "Wait, princess," called the frog after her. "You promised to take me with you." But she ignored him. The next day, the princess was sitting at the table when she heard something coming up the marble steps. Squish, squish, squish. Then came a knock at the door and a voice that cried out, "Oh, princess, open up, please." She ran to the door and opened it and saw the frog whom she had forgotten. Horrified, she slammed the door shut and returned to the table, acting as if nothing was the matter. However, her father, the king, saw that she was alarmed and asked her what was wrong. "There's a horrid frog outside," she said. "He fetched my golden ball for me from the water, and I promised he could come to live with me. But I never thought he meant it. Now he's standing outside and wants to come in." As she said this, there was another knock at the door, and she could hear the frog calling to her. "You must keep your promise," said the king. "Go and open the door for the frog." The princess opened the door, and the frog hopped inside and followed her to the table. She sat down and resumed eating. "Lift me beside you," the frog called out. The princess loathed the thought of this, but her father, the king, ordered her to do it. With revulsion, she picked up his slimy little body and placed him on the table. "Now, push your plate a little closer," he said to her, "so that we might eat together." The princess was forced to comply, and when the frog had eaten until he was full, he commanded her to bring him to her bed as he was tired and wished to sleep. The princess was terrified of sharing her bed with the cold, wet frog. She started to cry at the thought of it, but her father became angry and ordered her to keep her promise. So she picked up the frog with 2 fingers and carried him to her room. She was so enraged at the thought of putting his slimy little body on her pillow that she flung him with all her might against the wall. "Leave me alone, you disgusting frog," she said. The moment the frog hit the wall, he transformed into a handsome young prince. The princess was shocked and then delighted. The two sat up talking, and she cherished him as she had promised. Then, in their delight, they fell asleep together. The next morning, a fine carriage arrived, drawn by 8 horses and conveying the prince's servant, Faithful Henry. When Faithful Henry learned that his dear master had been turned into a frog, he'd had 3 iron bands placed around his heart to keep it from bursting from grief. The princess and the prince got into the coach to travel back to the prince's realm, and as they rode, they heard 3 mighty cracks. The prince at first feared that the coach was breaking, but Faithful Henry explained that the iron bands around his heart had sprung open because he was so happy that the spell had been broken. So I bet when you heard that it was the Frog King, you were all thinking it was the French version where she's going to kiss the frog. No, it's the German version where she flings him at the wall. But it's such a great, I think, sort of illustration of getting out of that kind kind of, I'm going to conform to the demands, I'm going to follow the rules. No, I'm going to find something authentic, and it might not be very agreeable of me, but actually that's the thing that is transformative. That's what breaks the spell, is when she finds her own authenticity. And Joseph, I was thinking about your point about the dependent narcissist in the beginning of the story, because she kind of is like that. She looks like she's so sweet and of course, little frog, but really she has it's passive aggressive because she's not planning on keeping her promise. She's behaving in this very shallow way, isn't she, in the beginning of the story?
Right. She's willing to agree to something because she doesn't believe she can be held to it.
Yeah.
So that she can get what she wants. And lo and behold, as a princess, her word actually matters. And the king is teaching her something about keeping her word.
I remember reading this. We all have memories of reading fairy tales or having them read to us when we were little and the meaning that we made of them. And I remember being so shocked and then so totally perplexed. Why would that be rewarded? And so we have, the king, the force for law and order, like, you gave your word. You have to honor your word. You made an agreement. You have to keep an agreement. And then she flings the little frog against the wall, and it's rewarded. And it lit me up that, oh my gosh, she transgressed. She did something terrible from the viewpoint of ego and rules, convention, and all of that kind of thing. And I never forgot it. I didn't understand it, but I never forgot it. So there's something here about transgressing that serves oneself, it was true for her and to her, and it broke the spell. Sometimes that's what it takes to serve ourselves. And that's an interesting conundrum. And you talked about Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung's memoir, and how at the end he says, that he hurt people and various other things. And he said, I couldn't do anything. This is just who I am, and this is how it was, and I could not do otherwise. And that sometimes that's the truth, that the cost of being your authentic self is going to be disagreeable according to convention or how other people feel. And so it takes some grit in order to serve ourselves and be authentic. It's not like it always comes easy.
Yeah, it reminds me of what became a really popular book called The Courage to be Disliked, which is an exegesis on Adlerian psychology, which is a very different approach. But I think the message is very similar, that if one understands what one's self-chosen task is in a given moment, there is a need to keep faith with what you know to be true about yourself, which inevitably means that some number of people are going to dislike you or dislike your actions. Conversely, if you are the kind of person that everybody approves of every action all the time, it suggests that you actually haven't taken a position, but you are in that chameleon place that you were referencing earlier, Lisa, that you're just changing all the time to get the calmness or the smile from the other person. But anytime we take a position on anything, let's just say you decide you're a vegetarian, and some members in your family are going to like that or not like that. But if that's true to you, you're going to continue to move forward and eat what you want. I know this sounds like a small thing, but it isn't a small thing. And many people who are vegetarian have stories of having to really wrestle with their family just to be validated that I don't want to eat bacon. Like, keep the bacon away from me, or I don't eat things that have a face. I'm not going to do it. And the frustration that the family or whoever's cooking the meal might feel, but it's common enough. Can we bear that tension? And and be who we know ourselves to be, and to accept going into it that some number of people are just not going to like it or like us. Can we make peace with that, even though it's not necessarily enjoyable to be disliked? And to grow into that strength, which brings us back to a more Jungian perspective of where do we get the strength so that we can courageously, occasionally, be disliked. And the strength to be ourselves comes from that relationship to our inner world, because that's the thing that nobody else can interfere with. You and your interiority, nobody can actually take that away from you once you discover it.
One of the things I find interesting about this tale is we have the father who says you have to keep your word, and you sort of read the tale and you're like, yeah, you do. And he is really kind of a good king, you know? And then the fact that the answer is that she has to break the rules. And I think it's true that both are sort of true, right? You have to live in the world where your word matters, where you need to follow through on things. And there are times when you have to break the rules. And I think the question is holding both of those things, that they're true at the same time. And then going to your point, Joseph, of, well, the discernment of knowing when is it right to break the rules. She didn't have a discernment process. It just welled up. And I think that also speaks to your question, Joseph, about like where do you get the strength? Because sometimes you just can't not.
And if we put on this lens of the feminine psyche and the animus, the frog being the animus, is that this young girl is introduced to her animus in this interesting way.
Yep.
And that as she continues to interact with the animus, because she would like to flee from that and then remain young and little. But the king seems to know something else, which is like, no, you are going to relate to the animus. Whether or not you like it, whether or not you think it's pretty, you're going to relate to the animus. And as she relates to the animus, she gets in touch with her fire. That we can almost say that the frog puts her in touch with her strength and her own opinions and what she likes and doesn't like. And when she finally says with great strength, I don't like this, so to speak, all of a sudden the animus becomes anthropomorphic and supportive. And she likes him and he likes her. And they go to the quote-unquote bed together, but they come into a kind of union. And the principle of the king, for me, is saying, now that you've discovered this psychological principle, you are not going to turn away from it. You are going to figure this out one way or another, whether you like it or not. And something good does come out of it.
Yeah, I like that. She wants to flee from the animus when she first meets him, you disgusting frog. But of course, that's the part of her that has access to the golden ball, symbol of the self, and to the depths of the well. It's really such a beautiful story.
And the transition from the world of the child to the world of the young woman is to take a partner, the young prince.
And a lot of times when we're kids, we are in that people-pleasing mode, when we're young. Part of becoming an adult is being able to have your own opinions that aren't necessarily going to be pleasing to others around you. So it really is about that sort of transition to a more adult kind of space.
I really like what you've said, that she's introduced to her inner other, the frog. And then the next step is the king, part of her own psyche, says, rules and regs, you made a deal, deal's a deal. And then what happens is her own instinctual self rears up. She doesn't have a conscious, thoughtful, think it out process. Something just emerges. But one way or another, she is interacting with this part of herself, the animus, her inner other, which takes me to this idea of people-pleasing. It really can be automatic. It can be transgressive. It can be ugly. It can be thoughtless. Of you did what? you said that to Mrs. So-and-so? Yes, but something is growing and something is happening that has to do with her own sense of agency. That no, me, not you. Me over you. That first she has no intention of honoring the deal she made with the frog. But I like this whole dynamic a lot of what a struggle it is, and that it's not as simple as saying, always, it's not always as simple as saying, let me think about it and get back to you in a day or so. But it gives us something to notice and to reflect on. I did that. Oh my God, I can't believe I said that. But what have I learned from that? What happened? Look what part of myself reared up out of nowhere to meet me, and to be curious about that and affirm it in the sense of like, well, I did that, versus only too quickly to censor ourselves for not adhering to convention. Just look. Take a look. Reflect on it. Here's what I did. What happened?
So here's a couple of ideas people might take away, that we can be agreeable or pleasing as long as it's freely chosen, as long as it's context sensitive, and we remember that it is reversible, that it's not an eternal contract. It's a moment in time. You've considered something, it's appealing to you, and so there we are. If it's aligned with your explicit, clear values, then it's good to go. And if this agreeable or pleasing behavior is paired with enough truth-telling and your own clear sense of boundaries, saying yes and up to what point, it can be a very pleasurable experience for you and the people with you. It becomes pathological where we feel it's an automatic agreement because there is a low-level threat somewhere in the environment that we're saying yes, and we're maintaining that, even though it's harmful to us or to someone else, and we're negating the fact that there's harm there. If we're saying yes in order to regulate the other person's mood, that's a tricky one.
Mm-hmm.
That really is in the space a lot. I'll just say yes to avoid the conflict. I'll say yes because I know how they get, when I don't. That's a tough moment. If we're saying yes just to reinforce this identity that I'm liked and I'm good, that's tricky. And then as you were saying, Deb, earlier, sometimes being agreeable is part of an entire trauma process, that there can be a PTSD dynamic to it, as well as other things like being depressed or having other kinds of dependency traits that are very, very young and require a deeper consideration. So being pleasing to another person is not inherently negative. It can be a wonderful, beautiful experience as long as our core is aligned with it and it is a co-pleasure. I am pleased to engage this way. They are pleased that I'm engaging this way, and we're both just having fun, enjoying ourselves. It's balanced.
Which takes me back to, something at the beginning that I said, and I'll just reiterate it. Your feelings will tell you a lot of like, oh God, just say yes. It's just much easier than to upset so-and-so. But you see what your feeling is. Just even saying that is like this feeling of like, oh, okay. Versus a feeling of this is a delight and I'm happy to do it.
Yeah.
Or do I feel coerced? Was I on automatic pilot? Did I say yes too quickly? Notice how you feel. Just notice.
And I'd love everyone to notice how you feel when I suggest dream school. Because we're hoping that it will be as pleasurable for you as it has been for us.
But Joseph, seriously, you were talking before about just finding your core and connecting with that core, and dreams are a great way to do that. So we hope that you'll check out Dream School. We've just refurbished everything. It's brand sparkling new. So come on over to our website and take a look at Dream School. And you can learn to work with dreams the way we do and the way we're about to right now as we transition to a dream.
Today's dreamer is a 32-year-old female who works as a child psychoanalytic psychotherapist in training, and her title for the dream is My Father Coming Home at Night. And here's the dream. It's night, and I'm alone in the entrance hall of my childhood home. Through the glass panels on the front door, the light from 2 car headlights comes pouring in, refracted through the glass. The light then bends away as the car parks in the driveway. My father comes in through the door. He's drunk, but enjoyably so, jolly and pleased to see me wanting to chat. We sit at a table and he tells me stories about some of the people he met that night. We sit close and are smiling and affectionate with each other. He then suddenly asks me, "But who's going to look after me?" I say, "I will, Dad, I will," as I stroke his back to console and reassure him. For context, she adds, "I've just started the 3rd year of my clinical training. It's intense, as in the UK, we work full-time seeing patients in public health services while training. I've been struggling with my morale and sense of resilience this week, which just ended as I had this dream on Friday night. I don't know if this is significant and could be admitted, but my partner of 3 years has been dropping hints that he might propose to me soon, which I'm happy about. At the same time, my mom and her partner, now of 13 years, are going through something of a crisis, re-questioning their relationship in the past weeks, which has caused me to worry for her. As for feelings in the dream, she says I was very happy to see my dad. He was a drunk but amusing, warm, and I enjoyed feeling him physically, the warmth of his breath and his skin, the bristles of hair in his face. At the same time, there was an undercurrent of worry about his drunken state, and that worry became the dominant feeling at the end when he asked who would take care of him. For associations, she writes, my dad died when I was 13 of advanced cancer, which was only diagnosed a week before he died. I don't dream about him often, but when I do, it feels significant, and each time, he feels so tactile and real, alive in that way. In the dream, my dad is around the same age as when he died, 62, whereas I'm the age I am now, 32. We moved away from this childhood home not long after he died. There's been a question in the family since his death about whether he possibly drank too much, whether that might have affected his health. My dad was an adult psychoanalyst, and so my own career now is calling me back home in a way. I'm unsure about the meaning of the light and the glass. This is such an important example of where context provides a whole other layer of meaning. If we just had the dream, who knows what we might make of it, but knowing that the father died terribly and very quickly and in a shocking way, and what the dream might be offering in terms of medicine, I think gives me just a sense that the comfort of this visitation by the father seems relevant to perhaps some of the uncertainties and that she's dancing with at the moment.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about having your dad die suddenly when you're 13 years old. So all of a sudden, he gets this diagnosis and then he's dead in a week.
No preparation for the family.
And 13 you're at such a crossroads, right? You're leaving behind the world of childhood. And then I'm struck by the fact that she's at another crossroads. She's 32. She's kind of going through this professional transformation. And it looks like she's on the threshold of another very, very major life transition, possibly getting married. And so it seems touching and fitting somehow that her dad would come back at this time. It could be that being on the precipice of such a major transition calls back this earlier time, in a way that kind of highlights uncertainty.
I'm thinking about the father image here, and that it is sort of presaged by that it's at night, and she's in her childhood home, childhood complex, and that the light, which is often a symbol of consciousness, is somehow refracted through glass panes on the door, headlights, etc., of an image of real ambivalence here about the father, that he's drunk, but hey, that's okay because it's enjoyable. He's jolly. He's a happy drunk, wants to chat. We sit close, smiling and affectionate, but in this state of inebriation on the part of her father complex, which then veers into something else. Who's going to look after me? And the dream ego says, oh, I will, to console. So there's something here that looks like it's companionable, affectionate, and then also sort of duty-bound. Our dream ego says, oh, don't worry, Dad, I'll look after you. I'll take care of you. And I'm putting that in the context of what she says now. Her training is finished. And then she says, my partner of 3 years has been dropping hints that he might propose to me soon. So I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about it in the context, too, of our fairy tale about the frog prince. And what does it mean to make an alliance with the masculine other in the waking world in the form of her fiancé, the masculine other in the form of her deceased father, and her own interiority around her own animus, and these images that these other males in her life can hold for her about that.
Picking up on that, Deb, I mean, obviously we would wonder about sort of the nature of the father complex, and we might imagine that it could be very, very complicated. And I agree with you, there's something ambivalent. I mean, it's so sweet that he visits her, and he feels so real, and it's such a comfort, and yet there's this undertone of worry. I'm also aware that what we know from the dream is that the father has driven while intoxicated. So there is this sense of a little bit of danger, a little bit of unnecessary risk. And again, she's, to go back to my point earlier, she's training to be a psychoanalyst. Her father was a psychoanalyst. She's presumably about to get married. When you get married, often the next thing you start thinking about is, are we going to have a family? So she is moving into this next stage of her life, in which the father complex might be expected to play a significant role. The father complex has something to say about what happens when we get out into the world. And of course, the father complex is implicit when we start creating a family of our own. So somehow, what I can say is that, well, I can only imagine that in a sense she was quite abandoned by her father, not through any fault of his.
By fate.
But by fate, yes, she was abandoned, and perhaps there's just a slight fear now that arises of, is the inner father sort of sturdy enough to help her through these next challenges? It's a complex image.
It makes me ponder whether or not she feels that marrying will be a betrayal to her father. Because there's so much trauma in the loss of the father at 13, it can interfere with the progression of the father complex. And if there is that kind of frozen in time moment, she may feel as she's pondering the proposal from her husband that there's kind of an unresolved allegiance in the background, and that the dream may be lifting up this snapshot of perhaps excessive obedience or alignment with the father complex that just needs to be examined, needs to be considered, and opening the possibility that it may not be a betrayal for you to choose a spouse, that the father, it is possible the father might bless the union upon further consideration.
I like that, Joseph. And I want to just add to that one of the part of the traditional wedding ceremony is the father gives the daughter away. So it's sort of psychologically, symbolically, one of the crossing over into adulthood things that happen is the father kind of gives the blessing. And so if we don't have a father, if the father, and I do wonder about the nature of the father. She says the actual father, that maybe he drank too much. So does she still feel, well, because of the nature of the father complex, the way her father is living in her, does she feel free to move forward into life? Or does that feel like a betrayal, perhaps of his memory? But both perhaps because of that relationship and how it's lived in her, and because of the traumatic way in which he died, she may not, as you're saying, feel like she has permission in some sense to move forward, and she has to stay back and take care of him.
Yeah, I think, maybe we're all circling around some of the same thing, but I am really paying attention in this dream to the fact that in the dream, the father is drunk. So what kind of a relationship is that when you're talking and visiting with somebody who's drunk and he's a happy drunk and it's cheerful and it's fun and it's all that good stuff. And then she talks about in the dream she was happy to see him, the warmth and all that, but there was an undercurrent of worry.
Mm-hmm.
And it became the dominant feeling in the end. When he asked me who would take care of him, and in the dream she says, I will. And I would want to know about, as you think about getting married to the man who's hinting he's going to propose, is that the paradigm for you around relationships somehow? That when you're close, the other person is drunk or somehow in an altered state, but you have these moments of closeness and fun and warmth and physicality. But there's an undercurrent of worry about, are these the conditions? Are these the terms and conditions, as they say? And what's going on here? And it relates to our topic of, do you have to accede to this? Is this the price of relationship? This is just the way it is. And you accede to this, that he's warm and funny and affectionate and drunk. And underneath, there's unacknowledged worry. And this is the first man in most of our lives, is our dad. And there's worry in the family that his drinking might have somehow contributed to his health condition and premature demise.
And the anger that you might feel.
And all that is missing in the context of this. Mm-hmm. So I think I would want to really talk about that. And it's a very hard thing to have a parent die before time and before you're grown. I can well imagine that there are elements of this coming up now as unresolved loss in the face of another commitment. I don't know, but that's, it would certainly be understandable and even expected.
Yes, Deb, I think what you brought up right there seems so relevant, that she has a father that, fatefully disappeared at 13. The relationship between her mother and her domestic partner is shaky, and she's considering going all in this relationship. And I would imagine around the edges are these fears about loss and instability of the relationship. What if my husband dies, or what if it doesn't work out and it becomes unstable? What if I'm all alone again? And do I want to put all of myself into something with an uncertain outcome? There's a lot of subtle things moving around that bears a gentle conversation.
Thanks for listening. To submit a dream, suggest an episode topic, or join our mailing list, visit our website, thisjungianlife.com. If you enjoyed this episode, give us 5 stars and a good review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure to click the notification bell to be alerted whenever we upload videos. And keep up with all things TJL by following us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and TikTok.